David, let's
Run! Go! Go!
David, suffering from PTSD, froze momentarily. Home Secretary Julia panicked, screamed, and trembled in fear, not knowing what to do. P.S. Bud tried to calm her down while bullets continued to rain on their armored BMW. On a train ride, David Budd noticed something unusual when a train staff member walked past the restroom and realized a passenger had been inside for too long, showing suspicious behavior. She knocked on the toilet door, trying to call out to the person inside, but there was no response. Sensing something was off, she left the carriage to report the incident to another carriage. Using his instincts and training, David decided to step in. He spoke with the staff member and learned that she had received intelligence about a male terrorism suspect, around 20 years old, potentially carrying an explosive device. Sandra informed David that the police had ordered the train to stop at Barnett Shed. According to the plan, David asked Sandra to stay in contact. He entrusted his 2 kids to another passenger, then headed toward the toilet where the suspect, an Asian man, was believed to be hiding. He requested the door be opened while the train was moving so he could kick the suspect off the train the moment the door opened, avoiding risk to the hundreds of other passengers on board. But unexpectedly, a man calmly stepped out. David immediately stopped. The suspect wasn't carrying any visible explosive device. He followed the man through the entire carriage, but saw nothing suspicious. After informing Sandra, David returned to the toilet and discovered a woman inside, clutching a trigger device in a state of complete panic. David calmly tried to reassure her, even as she trembled with the trigger still in her hands.
Don't do that, please. Don't do that. Don't move. Stay still, please. Just stay still, please. Please.
He told her he was trying to help. He called Sandra to report a second suspect, a woman wearing an explosive vest. It turned out the man who left the toilet earlier was her husband. The woman, Nadia, revealed that her husband had forced her into this situation. Sandra's job was to notify the police to send in a bomb disposal team and evacuate all the passengers in the carriage to a safer one. Meanwhile, David stayed with the suspect and continued calming her. Just as the train stopped, she suddenly closed the door and attempted to activate the device. David stalled her as long as he could until police arrived. Her husband was immediately arrested. 2 officers entered and asked David to step aside so the sniper could get a clear shot, but David refused. He was determined to protect the woman at all costs and demanded the bomb disposal expert be sent in. Gaining her trust, the woman slowly raised her hands with the device. The police held fire until the specialist arrived. The device was slowly removed from her hands, and the bomb vest was carefully taken off her. David then slowly led her outside while the police kept their sights trained on them from the outside. The next day, David met with his superior, Lorraine, to report the incident. He was reassigned as a close protection officer for the Home Secretary, Julia Montague. That night, he looked up information about Julia. He found some information suggesting that Julia was involved in operations in Afghanistan. The next morning, he arrived for duty at the Home Office. A little later, Julia arrived, shook his hand, and greeted him. His job was to stay by Julia's side at all times, even when she returned home, where he would thoroughly inspect the entire house before letting her in. Shortly after escorting her to the office, David was called back down for a security issue. It turned out that Julia's assistant, Chanel, had just been fired for accidentally soaking Julia right before a major TV appearance. Chanel was making a loud scene. David escorted her out, then got into a car and drove off. Later, he reunited with an old army friend from Afghanistan. The 2 caught up on each other's lives. Andy wanted David to join his group, which blamed certain officials for the war and wanted justice, those they believed had thrown them into the war in Afghanistan, a war that had cost the lives of many of their comrades. A private meeting took place between Julia and Stephen about an intelligence report warning of an imminent terrorist attack targeting a school. Julia was even more shocked to learn that David Budd's 2 children attended that very school. She decided to keep it confidential and immediately held an emergency meeting with national security agencies, including Anne. Right after, Anne rushed to the Counterterrorism Command Center, monitoring officers tracking 2 suspects in a sedan. The suspects then switched to a truck at the corner and headed straight toward the school. Anne ordered them to intercept and shoot if necessary. An Audi patrol car tried to block them, but the truck pushed through and got close to the school. Police eventually intercepted and opened fire. However, the other terrorist, still barely alive, triggered the explosive device, killing 3 officers and injuring the others. Julia was informed of the casualties, and David learned that his children were safe. The next day, his superior Lorraine called him in. She temporarily reassigned him to desk duty instead of continuing his protection detail for Lavender Julia, due to concerns he might be a target. During his time off, David met up with Andy for a few beers. Andy disapproved of David working as a bodyguard for politicians like Julia. He hinted that he wanted Julia to experience the consequences of what she had done to them in Afghanistan. Although David also harbored some resentment toward Julia, his feelings had begun to fade. A few days later, Julia reinstated him as the head of her protection detail and arranged to transfer his son Charlie to a different school. During a meeting between Julia and other officials about the source of the intelligence leak, Anne's department failed to provide useful leads on the terrorism investigation. Julia accused the counterterrorism unit of being the source of the leak that led to the failure. She also expressed anger over David's removal from her security team and wanted to shift the security command into Stephen's hands. Julia ended the meeting abruptly and left.
David, let's
David, suffering from PTSD, froze momentarily. Home Secretary Julia panicked, screamed, and trembled in fear, not knowing what to do. P.S. Bud tried to calm her down while bullets continued to rain on their armored BMW. David decided to exit the vehicle, leaving Julia inside. He quickly used his phone to snap a picture. From the image, he identified the shooter's position, on the rooftop of a building about 1,000 feet south. He reported it to the police, but they said it would take 2 minutes to arrive. Growing impatient, David pulled the body of the driver, Terry, from the seat, reversed the car rapidly toward the building, grabbed a weapon, put on his police cap, and instructed his team to protect Julia. He entered the lobby, took the elevator to the rooftop, and found the shooter walking with a large bag. To his shock, the gunman was none other than Andy, his old army friend from Afghanistan. Not wanting to be captured or put David in a difficult position, Andy made a fatal choice before David could stop him. Fearing the police would learn he knew Andy, David went home and retrieved a hidden pistol behind a wooden panel at the base of the wall. Later, Julia called him in. David tried to reassure her that she was now safe. She asked why the police were blocked from entering the square. David explained that the commanding officer at SO-15 gave that order. Julia immediately blamed Anne Sampson. Then, she allowed David to touch her. They hugged, they kissed. Things escalated further that night. David was later summoned by his superior, Lorraine Craddock. When he asked for updates, she told him the sniper used a fake identity to enter the building and no records existed about him. His fingerprints didn't match any known databases. She suggested David should be publicly recognized for his actions. Meanwhile, Anne approached David and warned that Julia was dangerous. They pressured David to give up information on her. Anne claimed that Julia knew exactly who the bombing target at the school was and that she knowingly allowed it to happen, even though she knew David's kids studied there. For added safety, Lorraine arranged for David and Home Secretary Julia to stay in 2 adjacent hotel rooms with guards stationed outside. The two could visit each other's rooms, and once again, they became closer that night. The next morning, David overheard a vague conversation between Julia and Stephen. Later, Lorraine summoned him to her office to report the Home Secretary's comings and goings. However, David hesitated and didn't know what to say until Lorraine conveniently answered on his behalf. A little while later, 2 officers under Anne's command who were investigating the terrorist incidents came to interview David. The rapid-fire questioning put him in a tough spot. They presented a photo from a nearby surveillance camera showing the sniper and David in close proximity. Fortunately, the camera angle didn't capture David's mouth movements, so it was unclear what he might have said. Even though David knew exactly what happened that day, his encounter with Andy, he chose to keep it all to himself. Eventually, the investigators left without getting anything useful from him. Back at the hotel, while David was trying to calm down after watching a news report about Andy, he heard Julia's room door opening. Through the listening device, he learned that someone had come to deliver her an encrypted tablet device. David rushed out into the hallway and demanded the man identify himself. That's how he learned the man's name, Richard Longcross. But when David searched the police database, no such person existed. Meanwhile, the counterterrorism team uncovered crucial information from surveillance footage showing Andy entering the building the night before the assassination attempt on Julia. Investigators concluded that the Home Secretary's schedule had been leaked. Another night passed. Late at night, David stole the encrypted tablet containing Julia's compromat and secretly entered her room to examine its contents. Although he understood what was inside, he acted as if he knew nothing when reporting back to Lorraine. and then asked him to further investigate Julia. As David was leaving the security agency, he received a call from Julia. She asked him to secretly drive her to a location outside the city. They arrived at Chequers, a countryside estate. David waited outside. It turned out Julia had gone to meet the Prime Minister. The secret meeting was about the controversial RIPA 18, and Stephen was aware of it as well. The next morning, Julia held an unofficial press conference to push forward the passage of RIPA 18. RIPA 18 would expand the government's power to surveil citizens, access personal data, and monitor communications without a clear court order. The law sparked public outrage, as many feared it violated privacy rights and could be easily abused. Protesters gathered outside government buildings, voicing concerns about mass surveillance and loss of civil liberties. During the press conference, P.S. Budd noticed someone lurking outside the room. He rushed out and confronted Tahir, who claimed he urgently needed to give Julia a corrected version of the speech, as the one she had contained a serious error. David forced him to open the folder. Seeing nothing suspicious, he allowed him to enter. Moments later, someone appeared suspiciously in the wings of the stage, and then a sudden explosion ripped through the area. Despite David and Officer Kim racing toward Lavender Julia, they were too late. Many lives were lost, and Julia was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Through surveillance footage in the auditorium, SO15 discovered that the explosion didn't originate from Tahir's briefcase in the wings. As a result, they were ordered to investigate everyone connected to the Home Secretary. They arrived at P.S. Budd's home, requesting his cooperation by handing over his phone and house keys. During the search, one security officer noticed something odd about a hidden compartment. Louise reached inside, but found nothing. David was later questioned. Investigators pointed out that he and the agent briefly left the auditorium and then returned. P.S. Budd was forced to admit that he had gone outside after noticing someone suspicious, Tahir. He briefly checked the folder, but didn't search him, as Tahir worked for the Home Secretary and nothing seemed suspicious. The investigation team now had a new lead. That night, David was taken to stay at his wife's house, but he couldn't sleep. Quietly, he took her keys and went to the hospital the next morning, only to receive heartbreaking news. The Home Secretary, Julia, had passed away. Devastated, he returned to his apartment and retrieved a hidden firearm. In a moment of distress, he discharged the weapon. A short while later, his wife came by to get her keys and found him wounded. She cared for him, confused by what had happened. David explained that the bullet was a blank, and he himself had no idea how it ended up in the weapon. David then tried to find out who Nadia's husband had met. She was shown a series of photographs, but lingered the longest on the photo of Tahir. Though she said nothing, both P.S. Budd and the accompanying officer understood what that silence meant. Deepak reported to Anne that the explosion didn't originate from Tahir's briefcase, but came from a hidden compartment beneath the stage. It was stored in a sealed box, which explained why the sniffer dogs didn't detect it. The device was activated by a pressure sensor, triggered when someone stood on the stage. That's why Tahir happened to be there, although it still didn't rule out the possibility of a remote detonation. Shortly afterward, Louise informed David that the explosion wasn't caused by the briefcase, which gave him some relief. He was no longer directly blamed. After reviewing all CCTV footage, Louise discovered that image data had been wiped for over an hour. David also began describing to investigators the man known as Longcross, who had previously shown up at the hotel. The investigation resumed with Nadia, and this time, David purposely showed her a photo of Longcross, despite Louise's objections. Nadia's silent reaction confirmed that her husband had likely met this man. Meanwhile, Louise had information about the sniper, Andrew Apstead, also known as Andy. She showed it to David, whose expression changed dramatically. He feared being implicated. That night, David opened the heating unit, retrieved a USB stick, and listened again to the audio recording from Julia's room, hoping to find anything useful. He wrote down keywords in his notepad and searched from a public computer. One of the keywords led him to the name of a prime minister, John Vossler, linking the content to political scandals. Shortly after, David waited at a street corner and spotted Longcross arriving with his associates. They had tracked his search activity. David recorded their license plate and tried to check it in the police database, but the results were restricted. Access required higher clearance. He then visited the nurse who was on duty the night Julia was hospitalized and asked questions about Julia's ex-husband. They mentioned he showed unusual interest in personal items she carried, which were never found. David decided to confront Roger. While Roger was meeting with constituents, David walked in and directly asked whether Roger had had been trying to recover Julia's handbag the night of the incident. He warned him that any involvement would come with consequences. The conversation visibly shook Roger. That night, he met with Mike, worried about the confrontation with David and suspecting he knew about the sensitive compromat files. Both Roger and Mike began to panic. At another meeting, Mike presented a photo of Longcross to Stephen, who denied any affiliation. As the new Home Secretary, Mike demanded that SO15 be granted access to secure data for the investigation. Stephen refused, claiming it would expose highly sensitive national security matters. David then met Rob, Mike's subordinate, and pressured him to share everything with SO15 to redirect the investigation. Later, David watched Rob's interview. Rob admitted they believed Julia was preparing for a leadership run. To stop her, Roger and Mike allegedly orchestrated a moment to politically embarrass her by using Tahir, yet claimed no knowledge of the explosion. Later, Lorraine summoned David and mentioned that he was rumored to have had a personal relationship with the Home Secretary. David denied the allegation, saying it was a smear campaign to damage his credibility. He also told Lorraine that Longcross had installed surveillance equipment and had even visited his wife Vicky's house, asking about any compromising material. David returned to SO15, curious about the progress in the Andrew Apstead case. While reviewing files, he noticed the serial number on the weapon involved in Julia's case didn't match records. He began investigating privately. On a cold, rainy night, he met with an individual to request an untraceable item, taking steps outside the official channels. Chanel happened to run into David and expressed regret over what happened to Julia. She apologized for her emotional outburst when she was let go. David agreed they could meet for coffee sometime, and they exchanged numbers. David then saw Chanel getting into a car with Luke Aitkins and took a photo of them. He told Louise about the car, which belonged to a company registered in the Cayman Islands. He believed it would require serious resources to orchestrate what had happened to Julia. They discussed Luke, who was linked to organized criminal activity, and questioned why Chanel was involved. Just then, Tom interrupted and summoned David. It turned out Lorraine dismissed David due to concerns over his recent behavior and injury. Tom, who had been monitoring David closely, had reported his actions. Meanwhile, Louise learned that Andrew Apstead had ties to David Budd. They both served in Afghanistan. Louise quickly reported this to Deepak. They also found proof that David had re-entered Julia's home, though they hadn't yet discovered that he was retrieving an encrypted tablet hidden behind a framed photo. Later, David arranged to meet Chanel in hopes of seeing Luke, but it turned out to be a trap. He was ambushed, injured, and taken away. SO15 began to believe David had been deceiving them all along and immediately launched a manhunt. Meanwhile, David, bloodied, woke up in an underground room. He was wearing a vest that appeared to be wired. There seemed to be no obvious way to remove it. He slowly got up and found a way out. He approached a woman and convinced her to call the police. However, her reaction afterward made it clear that David was now considered a suspect. He ran, but when the police arrived, David spotted Vicky and turned himself in. He raised his hands and revealed the vest, warning that it was set with a trigger. David tried to convince them of his innocence. He was ordered to go to Pope Square, where Louise handed him a radio. He told Lorraine that the vest couldn't be removed. Before any drastic action could be taken, Vicky also arrived at the scene. Deepak arrived and spoke with David. David explained that the vest was similar to the one Nadia had worn. He said the rifle used by Andy had been supplied by Luke. He added that Vicky also knew the truth about the modified ammunition. This helped convince Deepak. Shortly after, David confirmed that he had located Julia's missing tablet. Stephen overheard and called Longcross, instructing him to retrieve it. But David signaled Sharma to switch radio channels and warned them that Longcross might head to his flat. He should be apprehended immediately. After Longcross was arrested, David pleaded for help to remove the vest. Officer Daniel Chung took over the task but assessed the risk as too high and stepped back. Anne arrived on the scene. Vicky, standing nearby, feared David might be harmed. She ran toward him, saying she believed in his innocence and wanted to give him a chance to prove it. David and Vicky then went to his apartment. He asked her to bring him a rope and a shovel. They went to a nearby graveyard where she began digging and unearthed a black plastic bag containing compromat. Once Sharma received the tablet, David asked Chung for help disabling the vest. Chung provided the necessary tools and instructions. First, David stabilized the pressure trigger using using tape and a firm object. He then cut the black wire and taped both ends. Just before cutting the final red wire, David asked if Longcross had confessed. When Sharma confirmed Longcross had been released, David quickly cut the red wire, jumped across the gravesite, and escaped. Later, when Chanel returned home, David confronted her and pressured her into cooperating. She took him to Luke's house. When Luke drove away, David followed and discovered he was meeting with Lorraine. Realizing the truth, David took action. He disarmed a nearby guard and confronted both Luke and Lorraine. Luke admitted that removing Julia had benefited his business interests. David demanded that Lorraine call the police. Lorraine was arrested and admitted to leaking sensitive information. She explained that Luke had recruited and armed Andy, even giving him plans and details of Julia's events. She also revealed that David was assigned to Julia intentionally as a potential scapegoat. However, she denied involvement in the school incident. David believed there was still another layer to the conspiracy. A few days later, David watched as Nadia was questioned. Louise asked whether she had any knowledge about David's children. She implied that Nadia might have been manipulated too. But Nadia admitted that David had shown her photos of his children, a serious mistake. From behind bars, she recalled details that helped her group plan the school incident. She also confessed to designing all the explosive devices. Nadia revealed that she had never been a victim, nor someone forced into her actions. She admitted to lying about Longcross, misleading everyone. She claimed Luke was behind the device that killed Julia, and that she now saw her past actions as a form of misguided justice. Stephen and the Prime Minister were expected to resign. Mike would stay on to ensure the controversial bill, Repay 18, would be withdrawn quietly.